Welcome back again to Regaining the Balance. We're going to start up a new audiobook here, continuing our series of readings for, I don't know, various secret societies and things like that that have, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, seemed to have published a whole bunch of books trying to, I guess, clear their name or something. The first section we read was The Philosophy of Fire, which was extremely interesting read, actually. I'm still going to be doing a sort of follow-up to that book, but the same author of that book is the author to this book, The Rosicrucians and Their Teachings. So there'll be similar types of things going on here, and I just wanted to get started on this. We'll probably do the first 50 pages or so. So I appreciate you guys joining me, and hopefully you find this book interesting. And again, this is an audiobook, so, you know, nothing really to look at unless you want to read along. Just pop it on and put the sound up and just listen to the information. So I guess without any further ado, now I have two different parts to this. I'll do a screen share here. I'll show you guys. I have two different books. One of them is only 200 something pages. The other one is 300 something pages. So I'm going to just read the intro preface to the first one and preface to the second edition here. And then I'll skip back to the other book. So it is with great pleasure that the, well, let's see here. Sorry. There we go. The Rosicrucians and Their Teachings, the mysteries according to the manifestos issued at various times in the fraternity itself, also some of their secret teachings and the mystery of the order explained. Initiation en passant. And then it says Try by Reverend Dr. R. Swinburne Clymer, the author of Philosophy of Fire, Alchemy and Alchemists, etc. Second edition, Allentown, PA. Dedicated to her who must be nameless, to the James R. Phelps and Kate Randolph, M.D., and to all others who have so nobly stood by me when all seemed dark. Also to the brethren of that mighty fraternity who have shaped the destiny of states and empires, and who know not the word fear. The author. Quote, I fear neither man nor devil, neither hell or death, and only God when I wrong my fellow man. Unquote. A mystic. So here we go. Preface to the second edition. It is with great pleasure that the author issued the second edition of the Rosicrucians, Their Teachings, for it proves that the book is appreciated by the student of the true mysticism. Many books on the occult are issued, but it is seldom that a work of this nature runs through more than one edition. Contrary to this rule, the present work is stronger demand today than at any time since the first edition was published. In these days of pseudo-occultism, when different new orders are springing up like mushrooms during the night, the demand by the true student is for a work that is authoritative. This demand is met by the, quote, the Rosicrucians, their teachings, unquote, for its authority is beyond question. Hoo-hoo. First edition of the work was prepared in 1903 and issued in 1904, nearly 6 years ago. There is hardly a country in the world where it is not known, and even kings have recommended it. Much in the book has been copied by others and without a line of credit being given. These authors forget that the book is copyrighted and that if they wish to use any part of the book, it is required that they shall, under the law, give credit to the author and the book from which they copy. For instance, in a book issued but a short time ago and more than 5 years after the issue of the first edition of the Rosicrucians and Their Teachings, I find the fact set forth under the heading, quote, a mystery solved, unquote, is used boldly as original. This is nothing short of stealing, and how it is possible for another author and so-called leader to do this and feel honest about it, I fail to understand. It's funny, I actually ran across this book once. I first gave the world the facts concerning the name Christian Rosencross and Christian Rosenkreutz, and I boldly challenged the wide world for proof to the contrary. All others that use this are copyists, pure and simple. All those who wish to learn the facts for themselves may find the proof in the Rosicrucians, Their Teachings, page 130, first edition, and the work in question, page 516. More I need not say concerning this matter. A question which is asked the author many times each week is regarding the true fraternity of Rosicrucians or Order of the Rosy Cross. These seekers set forth the fact that there are Other movements which claim to be Rosicrucian, to these I would answer, Dr. P.B. Randolph brought Rosicrucianism to America about 1856. He taught all that belongs to Rosicrucianism, as his books prove. He founded the order of fraternity in America and taught many neophytes concerning the mysteries of the fraternity. Some of these became teachers. The line of succession has not been broken since the first founded the order upon American soil. No attempt has been made to found another Rosicrucian order or fraternity by outsiders until within the last 2 or 3 years. Such as have attempted to work any movement under the title of Rosicrucianism are clearly illegal in every respect. There are today laws in practically every state in America which legalize any order or fraternity which had been founded a certain number of years before the passage of such laws. As the order of fraternity founded by Dr. Randolph is in existence and continuing at that for more than 60 years, and since there is no other order, fraternity, or movement which can claim to be in existence even 5 years, it clearly follows that such orders are clearly illegal in every respect. However, it is not our desire to pass upon the legality of any order, no matter what the name, nor is it our desire to invoke the laws of any state, but it is our desire to see that credit is given to whom credit is due, and since Dr. Randolph founded the only one and true Rosicrucian order and fraternity in America, it follows that it is the only true order and that no foreign body has any or can have any legal existence. This is not here set forth with malice, but rather to point the only way there is to those who would find the truth. The challenge made years ago, which clearly states that Dr. Randolph was a man who, though undergoing severe persecution, stood up for the truth concerning these things and which made occult and mystical teachings possible in America, still holds good. Those who wish to know the truth and truth only can easily know for themselves by reading the books which were written by Dr. P.B. Randolph, the Rosicrucian, praying only that in the, quote, good time coming, unquote, credit may be given to whom it is due. Fraternally, R. Swinburne Clymer, Allentown, PA, March 1910. All right. Bada bing. Whoops. I don't want that. Let's do single page. Sorry, guys. This is much better. Nice fat letters. All right, let me make sure everything's good. You guys can see this okay? Yep. All right. All right, here we go. Oh, and let me just make sure also that everything online is good. Yep. All right, good to go. Okay. So, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to try to go through like 47, 50 pages of this in our first go. It's 300 something pages, so it's going to take me a couple of recordings to get this thing through. So, try. The soul groweth tall and comely, and waxeth powerful and strong, only as it putteth forth its will. Mankind are of 7 great orders. The last and the greatest are the genii of the earth, the children of the starbeam, the inheritors of the temple. Weak ones can never enter its vestibules, only by those who try, and trying for a time at length become victors and enter in. Man fails because of feeble, sleeping, idle will, succeeds because he wakes it up and never keeps it wakeful. Okay, Dr. P.B. Randolph, the Rosicrucian in the Soul World. So that's a quote from him. All right, that's weird though. Man fails because of feeble, sleeping, idle will, succeeds because he wakes it up and never keeps it wakeful. Ever keeps it wakeful. I'm so sorry. The fraternity of legend. Very many centuries ago, there lived on the soil where in subsequent ages stood Babylon and Nineveh the first, a mighty king whose power was great and undisputed. He was wise, well-learned, and eccentric. He had a daughter lovely beyond all description. She was as learned as she was beautiful. King and princess sought her hand in vain, for her father had sworn to give her to no man save him who should solve a riddle which the king himself would propound and solve it at the first trial, under penalty of decapitation on failure. Wow. The riddle was this: what are the 3 most desirable things beneath the sun, that are not the sun, yet which dwell within the sun? Thousands of the gay, the grave, the sage, and the ambitious who essayed the solution and failed left the presence to mount the horse of death. In the meantime, proclamation was made far and wide, declaring that robes of crimson and chains of gold, the first place in the kingdom, and the princess should be the reward of the lucky man. One day there came to the court a very rich and royal assembly from the king of the south, seeking an alliance and propounding new treaties, and among the suite was a young Basine poet who acted as interpreter to the embassy. This youth heard of the singular state of things, learned the conditions, and got the riddle by heart. For 4 long months did he ponder upon and study it, revolving in his mind all sorts of answers, but without finding any that fulfilled the 3 requisites. In order to study more at ease, this youth was in the habit of retiring to a grotto behind the palace, and there repeating to himself the riddle and all sorts of possible responses thereto. The princess, hearing of this, determined to watch him, and did so. Now poets must sing, and this one was particularly addicted to that sort of exercise, and he made it a point to imagine all sorts of perfections as residing in the princess, and he sung his songs daily in the grotto, sung himself desperately in love with his ideal, and so inflamed the girl herself, who had managed to both see and hear him, herself unseen, that she loved him dearer than life. Here, then, were 2 people made wretched by a whim. Love and song are very good in their places, but for a steady diet they are not comparable to many other things, and as this couple fed on little else, they both pined sadly and rapidly away. At length, one day the youth fell asleep in the grotto, and his head rested directly over a fissure in the rock through which there issued a very fine and subtle vapor, which had the effect of throwing the young man in a trance with big letters, during which he fancied he saw the princess herself, unveiled and more lovely than the flowers that bloomed in the king's garden. He also thought he saw an inscription which bade him despair not, but try, in big letters. And at the same time there flowed into his mind this sentence, which subsequently became the watchword of the mystic fraternity, which for some centuries has been known as that of the Rosy Cross. Quote, "There is no difficulty to him who truly wills." Unquote. Along with this there came a solution of the king's riddle, at which he remembered when he awoke, and instantly proclaimed his readiness to attempt that which had cost so many adventurers their lives. Accordingly, the grandest preparations, including a man with a drawn blade ready to make the poet shorter by the head if he failed, were made, and at the appointed hour all the court, the princess included, convened in the largest hall of the palace. The poet advanced to the foot of the throne and there knelt, saying, "O king, live forever. What 3 things are more desirable than life, light, and love? What thee are more inseparable, O king? Is thy riddle answered?" So the answer was, "O king, live forever. What 3 things are most desirable than life, light, and love?" "O king, is thy riddle answered?" "True," said the king, "you have solved it, and my word shall be kept." Unquote. Dr. P.B. Randolph in Revelette, the Rosicrucian story. I'll have to download all these ones now, too. While try is the watchword of the mighty Rosicrucian fraternity, love is the key. And it was thought that it was through love, the love for woman, the better half of mankind, that the watchword was discovered. Dr. James R. Phelps, a mystic of the first water, whom I both love and venerate for good cause above all others but one, in several articles published in Mind, has the following to say, quote, "There are mystic fraternities that affect to scorn woman and condemn the love that draws man and woman together. The American Rosicrucians have been criticized for inviting women to enter the temple. In fact, a ban of excommunication might perhaps have been laid on this mystic brotherhood were there any recognized power to issue the bull. It is doubtful that any organized occult fraternities admits women to full membership except the American section of the Rosy Cross. The Theosophical Society does thus admit them, and a woman holds the position of Mahatma of the society, but we allude to fraternities that are supposed to be working along truly occult lines. The general idea held by most of the orders seems to be that to attain to universal love, all personal love must be eliminated from the life as a stumbling block, a sign and snare to the one who would enter upon the quote-unquote path. But a divine voice comes sounding down the ages, quote, "It is not good for the man to be in his solitariness," unquote. "Scatter your coals all over the field, and you will get no fire. consequently no heat. Assemble them in your stove, and your fire burns and your house is warm. Scatter the atoms of the sun throughout the solar system, and planetary life and activity would cease. This race is so constituted that the spiritual rests on a material base, the latter on which angels disport rests on the earth. Earthly love must center in some object, or it will not grow or expand. As well might one throw seed into the air and expect a crop of flowers or grain. Is there only a question of terminology in this divergence of opinions? Perhaps the anti-feminine fraternities, fully sensible that true love, true is in big letters, is almost an unknown quantity in human life, would guard its members from becoming entangled in the meshes of some mundane semblance of love. There might be color to this supposition, were it not that the brotherhoods are prone to deny that a true spiritual love does reach any manifestation on the plane of matter, the sex plane, if you like. This denial the American Rosy Cross will not accept, and there is ample authority for this non-compliance in 1 Timothy 4, 1-5, noting in verse 4, quote unquote, creature should be rendered, quote unquote, creature thing. It would seem from Paul's words that there is nothing that may not be sanctified, literally consecrated or made holy. Perhaps Swedenborg is not far from the truth in his great work on conjugal love when he says that, quote, it is not known in this world what conjugal love is, or that such a thing exists, unquote, and then goes on to indicate that the quote, doctrine of permission, unquote, the exemplification or acceptance of which is causing a commotion in the Swedenborgian communion. A book written under the inspiration of a brother of one on these anti-feminine fraternities ends thus, quote, if ye be led by the Spirit, ye are not under the law, unquote. Very true, but will this suggestion bear extensive application? And what is this thing called love that has no center from which to radiate? What is this diffusive, general, universal emotion that has no focal point? What more universal, more general, more diffusive love than that of the Christ? And yes, his human plane needed a center. It found that center in the band of 12 and rested with its greatest meaning in the soul of John, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Is there not something wrong with the cults that would crush out this inherent desire of the heart for something to love? Can one develop a universal love from this emasculated emotion by becoming a memorial? I don't know what that is. To burn his heart to a cinder on the altar and scatter its ashes over the face of creation? Is there a love that does not desire an object on which to center, to give, quote, sigh for sigh, unquote, and song for song? It matters not if the object walketh hand in hand with one in this earth life, or waits his coming in the world beyond. The man's love will center in someone, even if in lieu of a God-given companion, it centers in himself. Is there not a great danger in attempting reversal of divine order and intention, even although these have become somewhat distorted and perverted by human ignorance and strange experiment? The altar stands, even though recreant priests have kindled strange fires upon it. And in this desire, longing, seeking for expression by human love, there is much of the divine, and this instinct cannot be ignored or trampled on. For it may be that there is a meaning of Romans 1:27 that did not die out with the first century, and it may also be that the teaching alluded to in 1 Timothy 4:3 has strewn the earth with more psychic wrecks than the Swedenborg's law of permissions can ever do. Have not the teachings of the mystics become sadly distorted by their successors and representatives? One might be justified in thinking so after reading Ardath by Corelli. The idea of Guinotti that runs through that fascinating book does not seem to be that the desire of the soul should be crushed out. Rather, it would seem that the, quote, longing of love, unquote, might compel even an angel mate to leave the world of light and dwell with the loved one on earth. Zanoni, by Lytton, if I read it aright, finds it well to sacrifice occult powers to human love. Seraphita drew the love and desire of both youth and maiden, only to fuse their two souls in one and help them accomplish what neither could accomplish alone. The strange old man in Editorfa, in all his journeyings, could not and would not sever the tender ties of memory that bound him to wife and child. And every master of the occult who has given to the world anything that makes life grander, richer, more full of divine meaning, has at some time reached the point in his development where only the love of a woman could teach him what God meant when he called him into being. And so Seraphita is by Balzac, the famous author. And I think you're gonna notice as we go through here, there's gonna be a lot of like footnotes. Unfortunately, this book's got tons of them. Some of them run multiple pages long, so I'm gonna do my best to finish a paragraph and then go back and hit the footnotes or whatever else in order. Okay, yeah, just to let you guys know. In ages long past, Jehovah of Elohim pronounced the sentence, "Unto my husband thy desire, and he shall rule over thee." Who made woman the patient, clinging, earnest being she is? And, taking advantage of this desire, who makes her the tool and the fool of these conditions? Has the man who accepted her adulation and allowing her to make a demigod of him anything to do with it? It is easy to take up Paul's characterization of quote-unquote silly women, but go back to a verse in the same 2 Timothy 3 and see who it is that captures these silly women. For verse 2 reads, "Men shall be lovers of self," etc. Read the first 7 verses of the chapter and see whether the old mystic lays his indictment against women only. What a grand machine the Roman Catholic Church is. How completely the minds and conceptions of the people are held to the dogmas and teaching of the Church. How willingly the people seem to yield obedience to Church authority. What is the secret of it all? Not blind ignorance on the part of the devotee. It is a mark of the grossest misconception for one who holds that idea for a moment. For in that communion are many bright minds. What then is the subtle influence that enables the priest to hold his parish together, and the bishop to rule his diocese, and the pope to control the entire church in one congruous mass? The conglomeration of sorry. This is a question. What then is this subtle influence that enables the priest to hold his parish together, the bishops to rule his diocese, and the pope to control the entire church in one congruous mass? A conglomeration of incongruent material? There is a deep question just here that goes back to the beginning of things, or if you deny that they had a beginning, to the beginning of the present arrangement. He hath made them from the beginning male and female, and whatever may have been the nature of the people of the first creation, those who lived on earth during the period of the Elohistic creation, it does not enter into the present question, for I am inclined to agree with Swedenborg's assertion that the present race cannot understand the nature and characteristics of the first race, even the least degree. Any effort to attain to an androgynous state patterns after that most ancient people must and will be futile. The whole thing is beyond our comprehension. The Jehovistic produced a totally different race from the Elohistic, and the separation of the feminine from the masculine, and ultimately the difference between the two in the physical and mental planes, was a necessity, and this distinction will exist forever, in big letters. I know that this will be denied, but it stands on as good authority as does the dogma that denies spiritual sex distinction. The Catholic Church is the only church of Christendom that recognizes the feminine quality, element, or attribute in deity, and it is by means of the deep hold on this mother instinct of the heart that the Roman Church has that it maintains its influence over the minds of its devotees. If this is not the secret of Romish perpetuity, what is the secret? It is a power that is not to be lightly considered. The Protestant Church has set up a masculine god as an object of worship and is fast losing its hold on the hearts of its adherents, and the consequent loss of their allegiance is not far off unless this church remembers, in big old letters. Pardon me while I take a sip. Had Mary remained absolutely virgin and not given birth to the Messiah, would she ever have been heard of? Would her name have been the rallying cry of millions? What does this question mean, do you ask? Simply this: a virgin symbolizes affection for spiritual truth. But what is this affection unless it bring forth something? While the virgin principle claims the worship and adoration of the devotee, the mother love with its glow, warmth, causes every other light to fade and lose itself with the greater effulgence. And we would ask whether the powerful love that finding expression in the plane, we would ask whether the powerful love that finding expression in the plane of material manifestation results in motherhood does not possess a divine dignity and meaning. Granting this point, the existence of a network of psychic wires that encircle the affectional nature of a man is the windings of the induction coil, as the windings of an induction coil, there must be a power that flows through these wires, and that power must be controlled by a mind that understands. And when we seek for it, we do not find that the Jesuit order is the engine in the cellar. And when we seek for it, do we not find that the Jesuit order is the engine in the cellar, and that the Jesuit provincial is the engineer? Interesting. Occult practices, even to the limits of magic and beyond those limits, are no strange thing to the inner circles of the Catholic Church. For this grand old religious system is old. It undeniably runs back to the apostolic times, and its earlier fathers have told enough in their writings to indicate that they not only understood but practiced occultism. And even in these modern times, not every master of the science has left the church fold. With Eliphas Levi, the Abbé Lecoeur, Count Guenotti, and some others who rebelled at the declaration of some dogmas and came out taking their knowledge with them, if any one questions this fact, let him read van der Nijlen's Height of Himalaya and In the Sanctuary. Or if he wishes evidence that there is some saintship yet left in the old church, Mary Corelli's fine book, quote, The Master Christian, unquote, will bring some enlightenment. For it will not do to forget that the apocalyptic exploration revealed something worthy of commendation and vivification in every one of the 7 churches from Ephesus to Laodicea, with perhaps the greatest balance in favor of Laodicea. Coming as many practical mystics did from the Catholic communion, they brought with them some of the plunder that had better been left behind. I do not make this remark in any spirit of unkindness or critical depreciation. In the ranks of these mystic fraternities, there are those whom I esteem, almost venerate. The Heliobas of Mary Corelli's romance in Ardath, and the old master who makes a brief appearance in her Soul of Lilith, and the Bishop Angelo of van der Nijlen's books are not imaginary characters. They have walked among us, and some of them are walking among us today. They make no outward sign, they do not strive, nor cry, nor does any man hear their voice in the streets. Knowing the requirement of active membership in some of these fraternities and recognizing also the fact of human limitations, I assert it is impossible for a man to retain an active connection with a genuine mystic fraternity and be a bad man at heart. And genuine is in big letters. One may even deny, betray, forsake his master, and still not entirely sever that cord of love by which that same master will someday draw him back. The absolute perfection exists in this world, in some people's imagination, but it does not come into close contact with the world at large. In big letters, our angels wear coats of skin. When they divest themselves of these coverings, they leave this realm of the seen. We question if the world has the slightest idea of what it really owes to the silent spiritual work of these mystic fraternities, as carried on by them during the last 40 years. The inner circles have given no sign, and the outer guards have only dropped hints. But every movement in this world, whether physical, psychical, or spiritual, reaches a danger point at some period of its history, and Achan's wedge of gold and mantle of Shinat may work evil in Israel. Working along psychic lines has its temptations, and when one gains control over the psychic plane of the human race and acquires the power of shaping thought and action, the temptation to use that power and control is apt to be too strong for the average man. Alright guys, so you guys should pay attention to this part. I'm going to go ahead and just really quickly do a highlight and a bookmark. Because yet again, this right here, this highlighted part, I'm going to read it again for you guys. Working along psychic lines that has its temptations, and when one gains control over the psychic plane of the human race and acquires the power of shaping thought and action, the temptation to use that power and control is apt to be too strong for the average man. Look around at this society right now, okay? This sentence is explaining to you what the quote-unquote people in control, how they understand a good portion of this secret doctrine, so to speak. And the thing is that you can use it for really good purposes, or you can use it for selfish purposes. And the opposite, again, it's the yin and the yang, you know? We have yet another expression of duality here. But this is very important to understand, because and the reason I'm reading a lot of these books is to show you guys, or at least give you some of these quote unquote not secret societies, not anymore. These guys aren't a secret society anymore. They're out in the open. Same thing with the Freemasons. The actual Freemasons themselves are not a quote-unquote secret society. They're out in the open. You can see their lodges all over the place. They have signs in the going into almost every town in America, you know. And so it's like they're out in the open. They're not a secret society, but they are a society that is secret, or that has secrets in it. So there just needs to be a distinction, because a lot of people just lump it all together as all secret societies. And if you just look at it logically, obviously that's not the case, because I'm in my own town. In my own very small town in the middle of nowhere, there is a Masonic lodge. So, continuing, a Christ may turn his back on the offer of the universal dominion, which is the whole thing with the devil, by the way, or the story about the devil, the allegory. But we are not yet Christ. There is a palpable gap between the best man on earth and the master. Not all the pleadings of Joab and his captains prevailed against the determination of King David to, quote, number of the people, unquote, and it may take the mystic 70,000 victims from the people to even up matters and adjust the balance. Huh? Okay. There is an old mystic maxim, quote, all power is from the she side of God, unquote. We have hinted that this acknowledgement of the mother, feminine, love, principle, and deity is the secret power of the Catholic Church, of the Rosicrucian fraternity as well. Not that it's the Catholic Church, that is, not that its rulers are actuated by this infilling of their own souls with divine love, but that it is the living dogma of the masses of her devotees, and Jesuitism has got hold of the string. A full and measure of this same love that flows from the she side of God is a necessity to one or a band who would set out to elevate and reform the world with any hope of success. It is not the Christ in one's soul that leads him to look down on struggling, suffering humanity as canaille, literally dogs, or to give a cold, hard stone to him that asks for bread. The most tender, gentle, loving master of mysticism in the world would swamp himself if he stepped on to this hummock. Mary Corelli, in her Soul of Lilith, makes Ferraz sing a story of a deeply learned mystic whose very austerity and surface goodness attracted the people to him. From becoming annoyed at their continued interruption of his devotions, he came to despise them, and he finally hid himself in a dense wilderness. One day, being disturbed by the song of a bird that entered his hut, he killed the little thing, and immediately an angel appeared and rebuked him for slaying his messenger. And then the mystic began to see that his great regard for his own sanctity stood as an obstacle in the way of his usefulness to God and humanity, and he became a changed man. So, there you go. Obviously, this is a moral story about, getting over your ego. Are the desires and the aim of the mystic fraternities of our day the elevation and regeneration of the race? If so, are we working towards that end? If that's true, if that's maybe in 19 something, that might have been kind of the truth, but it's really hard to see that nowadays, isn't it? At least in the larger scope of things. Does the end justify the means that some of us are employing? Does the contempt with which we regard the occult adventurer, the sneak thief that looks for occult power or for selfish ends, belong to the honest, although ignorant seeker after light and life? Is there any end that one would wish to gain to be attained by this means? Will this course even bring about the end that true mysticism would seem to desire, the uplifting and ennobling of humanity. One may gain a certain temporary power by standing aloof from the world, coming into touch with it only to number it as David did his people. The desire of the human heart is for domination, for Babylon is not entirely fallen. mm-hmm. Sorry guys, this is gonna apply into a future video, so I gotta highlight this guy and give it a little bookmark. There you go. Is it not well for mysticism to look within its own ranks for the evil that causes it to fail to stand in the face of its enemies? And finding it after diligent search, is it not well to make a holocaust of the plunder and everything connected with it? It is difficult to understand the contempt with which some mystic orders seem to regard women, in view of the fact that it was the feminine on the master's nature that drew all to him in a loving, undoubting trust that this slighting, belittling estimation of woman is a manifestation of Jesuitism that is inexplicable. But I must qualify that statement. The Pharisee and the Sadducee elements were not attracted to him. They would spurn the woman who washed his feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair, but he did not. Perhaps woman, in her cramped, distorted condition, may show a clinging, longing, intensely desiring tendency, which clutches at whatever extends to her hope a deliverance from her bondage, and she may extend this desire to the teacher. So that poor, despised woman followed the Nazarene into the Pharisee's house, and in reply to the criticism of the sanctimonious host, he said, quote, "For in that she cast this ointment upon my body, she did it to prepare me for burial," unquote. Aye, and when a man is slowly working himself free from his inherent evils, quote unquote, and coming to the last grand passion through which he lays excuse me, and coming to the last grand passion through which he lays them down forever, who senses the meaning of the process? Some man? They all forsook him and fled. Only woman, in big letters, stood by him from the beginning to the end. And when the struggling between the man and the angel comes on in the human soul, it is only woman that understands. Unquote. So much for what one of the greatest mystics of the day has to say, and surely he should and does know these things, as but few others can know. The Rosicrucians, according to all their teachings and writings, recognize woman as being equal with man, but they also recognize the true woman as being the better part of man, the she side of God the Father. All true mystics of the past ages recognize in woman that part of themselves which they knew was needed in their own nature in order to complete themselves. Does not Thomas Vaughan close his famous book Magical Writings with the following? I guess this is part of it? Yes. Ladies will buy thee for a new romance. Oh, how I'll envy thee when thou art spread in the bright sunshine of their eyes and red, with breath of amber, lips of rose that lend perfumes unto their leaves shall never spend. When from their white hands they shall let them fall into their bosoms, which I may not call aught of aught of misfortube. Okay, I think it means end, because the B is next to the, okay, so aught of misfortune thou dost drop to rest in a more pleasing place, and thou and art more blessed. There in some silken soft fold thou shalt lie, hid like their love or thy own mystery. Okay. In placing the present work before my readers, maybe I should do that again now. Placing that present work before my readers, I do so without an apology whatsoever. The foregoing pages, as well as those to follow, are taken from the writings of such that should and do know what they write. All the manifestos are taken from the original, which are in my possession. Credit is not given for the very good reason that the profane world is ignorant of their authorship, except in a very few instances, and those that know will not tell. This is as it should be, and must ever be. A few of the mysteries explained are from secret records in possession of those who have a right to hold them. Practically nothing in this book is original, as nearly all the information has been published in manifestos. Some of these have been private, while others were to be had by all those who were interested. The book is simply as a history of this mighty order or fraternity, and even as such contains but a very small part of their teachings. So far as the part concerning initiation, quote unquote, is concerned, each reader must judge for himself whether there is any truth in it or whether the compiler has any knowledge of the subject. As is well known, one may not write plainly on this subject even though he may know all about it. The chapter is simply en passant, and perhaps there may be some truth found therein. And en passant means in passing in French. As at best, it will not hurt to follow the teachings therein contained. Is the Rosicrucian fraternity old, and does it still exist? Listen to what P.B. Randolph has to say in Ravalette. Quote, many, but by no means all, the alchemists and hermetic philosophers were acolytes of that vast secret brotherhood, which has thrived from the earliest ages and under different names in different lands, has performed, is still performing its mission. The members of this mystic union were the Magi of old, who flourished in Chaldea ages before one of their number, Heber, left his native plains and on foreign soil founded the Hebraic Confederation. They were the original Sabaeans who for long ages preceded the sages of Chaldea. They were the men who founded that Semitic civilization, that faint shade of which we find having long avenues of centuries in the moldy records of early China, itself numbering its years by the thousand. Of this great brotherhood sprung Brahma, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Zoroaster, Plato, the Gnostics, the Essenes, and therefore Christ himself, who was an Essene and who practiced the sacred doctrine of the mountain of light. They were the dreamers of the ages, the sun of the epochs, eclipsed occasionally but anon bursting forth in glory again. They were the men who first discovered the significance of fire, and that there was something deeper than life in man, profounder than intellect in the universe. Whatever the transcendent light now illumes the world comes from the torches which they lit at the fountain whence all light streameth upon that mystic fountain, which they alone had courage and endurance to climb, and climbed to over a ladder whose rungs were centuries apart. Hermes Trismegistus, Egypt's mighty king, and that other Hermes, Asclepius the fourth, was an adept, a brother, and a priest, as was Melchizedek. Before him, that famous pre-Adamite monarch, that Melchizedek, who was reputed to have been born of a thought and to have lived for countless ages. And the asterisks up here just refer to the Philosophy of Fire book, which we've already read, and you can find in our if you just type it in the search bar, you can find the audiobook of that. And so with the Greek Mercurius, theirs too was a wondrous learning wherein Moses was skilled, and at their fountain the Hebrew Joseph drank. Nothing original in thaumaturgy, theology, philosophy, psychology, entology, and ontology, but they gave it to the world. And when philosophers thought they had gained new thoughts and truth, the record of the order proved them to have been old ages before the academic era of chronology, and to have been the common property of the adepts. I have been led into these remarks and explanations for the purpose of finally and authoritatively settling the vexed question concerning the Rosicrucian. Why was a Rosicrucian elected to the Supreme Master of the Supreme Grand Lodge of the universe, ancient and mystic Oriental Masonry? Why was a Rosicrucian selected to be the Supreme Master of the quote-unquote militia, and why is the leading spirit in one of the large cooperative home builders society a Rosicrucian? I have these questions to be answered by those who know more than I do. I know these things as facts, and that is enough for me to know. The people as a whole can rest assured that as leaders are needed, they will be supplied by those who know. By R. Swinburne Clymer. All right, so that was the preface. Here comes the initiation section. How long? Let me just put the break sign up real quick, guys. Weird. How long has it been going on? All right. I'm still doing good here. Continuing. Break sign off. Boop. There we go. Initiation. En passant. Again, means in passing. Man is arrogant in proportion to his ignorance. Man's natural tendency is to egotism. God, isn't that the truth? Man, in his infancy of knowledge, thinks that all creation was formed for him. For several ages, he saw in the countless worlds that sparkle through space like the bubbles of a shoreless ocean only the pretty candles, the household torches that Providence had been pleased to light for no other purpose but to make the night more agreeable to man. Astronomy has corrected this delusion of human vanity, and man now reluctantly confesses that the stars are worlds larger and more glorious than his own, that the earth on which he crawls is scarce a visible speck on the vast chart of creation. But in the small as in the vast, God is equally profuse of life. That's very quantum physics of you, sir. The traveler looks upon the tree and fancies that bogs were formed for his shelter in the summer's sun or his fuel in the winter frost. But in each leaf of these bogs, the Creator has made a world. It swarms with innumerable races. Each drop of the water in yon moat is an orb more populous than a kingdom is of men. Everywhere, then, in this immense design, science brings new life to light. Life is the one pervading principle, and even the thing that seems to die and putrefy but engenders new life, and changes to fresh forms of matter. Reasoning then by evident analogy, if not a leaf, if not a drop of water, but is no less than yonder star, a habitable and breathing world, nay, if even man himself is a world to other lives, and millions and myriads dwell in the rivers of his blood, and inhabit man's frame as man's inhabits earth, common sense, if our schoolmen had it, would suffice to teach that the circumfluent infinite which you call space and stars is filled also with its correspondent and appropriate life. No, I don't think I could disagree with that. Is it not a visible absurdity to suppose that being is crowded upon every leaf and yet absent from the immensities of space? The law of the great system, God, forbids the waste of even an atom. It knows no spot where something of life does not breathe. And I think, what is that? Is that not the first rule of thermodynamics, right? Matter or energy can never be destroyed. So, there you go. I'm not even sure if that concept existed at this point. It might have. And the very carnal house is the nursery of the production and animation. Is that true? Well then, can you conceive that space which is the infinite itself is alone a waste, is alone lifeless, is less useful to the one design of universal being than the dead carcass of a dog, than the peopled leaf, than the swarming globule? The microscope shows you the creatures on the leaf. No mechanical tube is yet invented to discover the nobler and more gifted things that hover in the illimitable air. Yet between these last and the man is a mysterious and terrible affinity. And hence, by tales and legends, not wholly false, not wholly true, have arisen from time to time beliefs in apparitions and specters. If more common to earlier and simpler tribes than to the men of your duller age, it is but that which the senses, excuse me, it is but that with the first the senses are more keen and quick, and as the savage can see your scent miles away, the traces of a foe, invisible to the gross sense of the civilized animal, so the barrier itself between him and the creatures of the airy world is less thickened and obscured. But first, to penetrate this barrier, the soul with which you listen must be sharpened by intense enthusiasm, purified from all earlier desires. Not without reason have the so-styled magicians in all lands and times insisted on chastity and an abstemious reverie as the communicants of inspiration. When thus prepared, science can be brought to aid it. The sight itself may be rendered more subtle, the nerves more acute, the spirit more alive and outward, and the element itself, the air, the space, may be made, by certain secrets of the higher chemistry, more palpable and clear. And this, too, is not magic, as the credulous call it. As I have so often said before, magic, or science that violates nature, exists not. It is but the science by which nature can be controlled. Now in space there are millions of beings, not literally spiritual, for they have all, like the animalcule, unseen by the naked eye, certain forms of matter, though matter so delicate, air-drawn, and subtle that it is, as it were, but a film, a gossamer, that clothes the spirit. Hence the Rosicrucians, lovely phantoms of sylph and gnome. Yet, in truth, these races and tribes differ more widely each from each than the Kalmuk from the Greek differ in attributes and powers. In the drop of water, you see how the animalculae vary. How vast and terrible are some of those monster mites as compared with others. Oh, I know what he's talking about. Equally so with the inhabitants of the atmosphere, some of the surpassing wisdom, some of the horrible malignity, some hostile as fiends to men, others gentle as messengers between earth and heaven. He who would establish intercourse with these varying beings resembled the traveler who would penetrate into unknown lands. He is exposed to strange dangers and unconjectured terrors. That intercourse once gained, I cannot secure thee from the chances to which thy journey is exposed. I cannot direct thee to pass free from the wanderings of the deadliest foes. Thou must alone and of thyself face and hazard all. But if thou art so enamored of life as to care only to live on, no matter for what ends, recruiting the nerves and veins with the alchemist's vivifying elixir, why seek these dangers from the intermediate tribes? Because the very elixir that pours a more glorious life into the frame so sharpens the senses that those larvae of the air become to the audible and apparent, so that unless trained by the degrees to endure the phantoms and subdue their malice, a life thus gifted would be the most awful doom man could bring upon himself. Hence it is that through the elixir be compounded of these simpler herbs, his frame only is prepared to receive it who has gone through the subtlest trials. Nay, some, scared and daunted into the most intolerable horror by the sights that burst upon their eyes at the first draught, have found the potion less powerful to save than the agony and travail of nature to destroy. To the unprepared, the elixir is thus but the deadliest poison. Amidst the dwellers of the threshold is one. Two, surpassing in malignity and hatred all her tribes, one whose eyes have paralyzed the bravest and whose power increases over the spirit precisely in proportion to its fear. Thus spake the master Mejnour, I don't know, who represents cold science to his student Glinden. I have quoted this much from the work Zanoni by Bulwer Lytton, the Rosicrucian, because nowhere else is this so plainly given. The first thing that the neophyte must face and master is the terror of the threshold, and happy is he who does not falter, for to begin and falter is to be lost. To those who have no knowledge of the higher occult science, this may seem to be but a farce, but let us begin the true training in all sincerity, and they will soon learn the terrible reality of this thing. The terror must be faced at the very threshold of the deeper science, and the neophyte cannot advance any further until he has mastered this terrible being. You, my reader, may ask me what this terror is, and I intend to answer this question ere my present task is finished. When the terror is once mastered, he becomes the neophyte's best friend, and will do whatever he is commanded to do. Thus also with the other beings that the neophyte must meet and master, those that are most malignant to him will help him the most when he once mastered and placed under Those that are most malignant to him will help him the most when once mastered and placed under control. There you go. Perhaps the most terrible of all are those created through passion, which are the gnomes or elements of fire. These the neophyte must master first of all, and no human being who has not mastered them can understand the awful use of these beings can be put to. The profane world is entirely ignorant of these things and cannot understand them, but those who have mastered them can afford to meet the sneers of the world. So also with the elixir of life, men, cold scientists who recognize nothing but matter such as they can see and feel, deny that there is such an elixir, but I affirm, in spite of all the world, that I can say that I understand at least a little of modern chemistry and the actions of drugs, that there is a real elixir of life, not only of the spiritual part of man, but also of the body, and such as understand the composition or use of these double elixirs can defy both age and the body and spirit. I'm fully aware that some of the so-called great scientists of the present age will sneer at this, but I also know that they have sneered at other discoveries that have been advanced, but this will not discourage me nor cause me to discontinue in the work laid out for me by those few who are far greater than all the so-called scientists of the age. Well might Lord Lytton say with Count Tolstoy, the master of Russian literature, who had been banished from his home by the Russian tyrant, that, quote, Discoverer, what will destroy life, and you are a great man? What will prolong it, and you are an impostor? Discover some invention in machinery that will make the rich more rich and the poor more poor, and they will build you a statue. Sorry, but that is absolutely hilariously true. Discover some mystery in art that will equalize some physical disparities, and they will pull down their houses to stone you. Unquote. Such is the world of today, and it is only the few who have mastered the terror and fear nothing that are strong enough to face the tides, carrying nothing. Even though they may be banished from their own homes and lands, they have done their work as the great ruler has ordered them, and they are satisfied knowing that all things will be straightened out in the good time coming. To quaff the inner life is to see the outer life. To live in defiance of time is to live in the whole. He who discovers the elixir discovers what lies in space. For the spirit that vivifies the frame strengthens the senses. There is attraction in the elementary principles of light. In the lamps of the Rosicrucians, the fire is the pure elementary principle, as we know from reading The Philosophy of Fire, written by the same author. Kindle the lamps while thou openest. Kindle the lamps while thou openest the vessel that contains the elixir, and the light attracts towards those beings whose life is that light. Wow. Beware of fear. Fear is the deadliest enemy to knowledge. Such are the secret instructions to the neophytes who have been prepared to face the ordeal. Fear is the terror of the threshold, and none can master him unless he is thoroughly prepared for it. It is thus why so many fail. And the threshold, guys, if you haven't figured this one out yet, is death, obviously. Okay? And I completely agree. Fear of death is the basis of all fear in life. Period. When a neophyte has been thus prepared, he is strong enough to meet this unknown terror, and when he stands at the threshold with the light in which this pure fire of the Rosicrucian burns and knocks at the door of the threshold, he is ready to go forward when the door opens. And when he sees the terror of the threshold, fear, standing in front of him, he will subdue it by bringing his powerful and trained will into play. The terror is master no longer, but the slave, and he advances as fast as he is able to absorb the knowledge that is placed before him. What is this light of pure fire of the Rosicrucians? This is a question never plainly answered by anyone for reasons that will be plain to all, but I deem it of importance to say a word in regard to love. Quote, the power of the universe, unquote. Love, when pure and true, with no lust forming a part of it, is of a kind such as the Christ had for humanity. The rays that radiate from the soul of one who has such love are exactly like the pure rose diamond. Rays of dazzling bluish color, the one who has such love in his soul is master over not only the terror, but of his own self, and therefore of all the world besides. The rays that come from the soul when lust is the ruling passion are of a malignant red and destroy all that has come into contact with. This is the class of people, both men and women, who are the cause of hate, envy, strife, murder, and other crimes with which we are cursed. There is another class that comes between these two, the class that neither truly love nor are they exactly the victims of lust. This class are passionate, a passion that they mistake for love, which is mixed with lust. The rays from the soul of this class of people are a light red, and it is from among this class that the majority of neophytes come. Where lust is the master in a man or woman, they hardly ever change in this incarnation, but become degenerates. No sooner does the neophyte enter the path before he or she is assailed by the tempter, passion. This is one of the hardest things to master, and unless that neophyte does master his personal desires and becomes perfect, masters over the passions, he cannot advance. I mean, this sounds so much like Buddhism, you know what I'm saying? Like, mastering those parts of those elements of life, and letting them go. It's very interesting. It is a notorious fact that no matter how little women care for a man while he is leading an ordinary life, no sooner does he enter the path that leads to the higher occult when he will be tempted by women from all sides. And it is here where the real danger lies for him, and more fall on this account than on account of everything else combined. Hmm. Hmm. Love is the secret of all life, but lust and passion is death. Take the lamp of white light and go forward, and you will become the master instead of being the slave. When you have once entered the path, there is no turning back unless you desire to be followed by the terror all through life, and there is nothing more terrible, nothing more awful than this. Far better to die than have this misfortune befall you. There is another thing in connection with the true, in big capital letters, initiation that may hardly seem fair to the average person, and that is that the very ones who are selected to teach the neophyte are the ones that will place temptations in their way to try them and learn if they are worthy of the higher knowledge. These temptations are placed before the neophyte in such a way that he will not even stop to think whether they are right or wrong or how they come to be in his path. If the strength is his that is necessary to pass through the trials, he will not fall a victim to the temptations, but if he is not fit, he will fall, and no sooner does he fall than the master knows it. This may seem strange and untruthful, but to such that disbelieve, I can only say, try it and learn for yourself. And what I talked about earlier about how when I highlighted that section and I said this is the crux of the way that you know entire societies are sort of moved around and controlled in a mental facility. This talking about testing the neophyte. Don't you can imagine that this can be used again for good and for evil. So, you know, the nasty side of this kind of occultism would use very similar things, but in different ways. And I'm not going to go into it necessarily, but those of you guys who know a little bit about the nasty side of the occultism know that there's a lot of weird kind of things that they're supposed to go through and things are supposed to do to certain people that are really terrible. But I imagine that it's essentially this kind of very similar style of the way that the inner workings of these various occult societies work. And the nasty ones that are trying to run the world right now, obviously we know they're up to some really nasty, gross, and horrible things, which I'm not going to talk about here. So, but keep that in mind, guys. This power, like all things, it can be used for good, it could be used for evil, it could be used for selfishness, it could be used for selflessness. You will know them by their fruits, right? Just you know what I mean. Keep that. I always keep that in the back of my head. My reader may ask me what becomes of the neophyte that falls while traveling the path and disobeys instruction or tries to enter the door before he is fully prepared. To answer this question, I will quote from Bulwer-Lytton's Zanonia, which speaks plainer on this subject than any other work ever published. While Glyndon was the pupil of Mejnour, he was given his instructions as to what to do, the same as all the neophytes are. He was also told what not to do, and then left to himself with the temptations before him. There was one room which he was forbidden to enter until he had been fully prepared. His master well knew that if he would not be fit to pass the necessary trials, the temptations would be too strong, and he would enter the room. He therefore placed a book on the table in such a way that he would read the following passage, which happened to be one of the secrets of the Rosicrucian fraternity. Quote, when, then, the pupil is thus initiated and prepared, let him open the casement, light the lamp, and bathe his temples with the elixir. He must beware how he presume yet to quaff the volatile and fiery spirit. To taste till repeated inhalations have accustomed the frame gradually to the ecstatic liquid is to know not life, but death. Unquote. Glyndon knew that he was not yet an initiate and therefore not prepared, but this part he did not notice. He had already partaken of the forbidden liquid, and this was his second trip to the forbidden chamber. He ranged the mystic lamps, 9 in number, round the center of the room, and lighted them one by one. A flame of silvery and azure tints sprang up from each and lighted the apartment with a calm and yet most dazzling splendor. But presently this light grew more soft and dim, as thin gray cloud, like a mist, gradually spreading over the room, and an icy thrill shot through the heart of the Englishman, Glyndon, and quickly gathered over him like the coldness of death. Instinctively aware of his danger, he tottered, though with difficulty, for his limbs seemed rigid and stone-like, to the shelf that contained the crystal vials. Hastily he inhaled the spirit and laved his temples with the sparkling liquid. The same sensation of vigor and youth and joy and airy lightness that he had felt before instantaneously replaced the deadly numbness that just before had invaded the citadel of life. He stood with his arms folded on his bosom, erect and dauntless, to watch what should come. The vapors had now assumed almost the thickness and seeming consistency of a snow cloud, the lamps piercing it like stars, and now he distinctly saw shapes, somewhat resembling an outline of those of the human form, gliding slowly and with regular evolutions through the cloud. They appeared bloodless, their bodies were transparent and contracted or expanded like the folds of a serpent. As they moved in majestic order, he heard a low sound, the ghost, as it were, of voices, which each caught and echoed from the other, a low sound, but musical, which seemed the chant of some unspeakable tranquil joy. None of these apparitions heeded him. His intense longing to accost them, to be of them, to make one of this movement of aerial happiness, for such as seemed to him, made him stretch forth his arms and seek to cry aloud. But only an inarticulate whisper passed his lips, and the movement and music went on the same as if the mortals were not there. Slowly they glided around and aloft until in the same majestic order, one after one, they floated through the casement and were lost in the moonlight. Then, as his eyes followed them, the casement became darkened with some object undistinguishable at the first gaze, but which sufficed mysteriously to change into an ineffable horror the delight he had before experienced. By degrees, this object shaped itself to his sight. It was as that of a human head covered with a dark veil through which glared with livid and demoniac fire eyes that froze the marrow of his bones. Nothing else of the face was distinguishable, nothing but those intolerable eyes, but his terror, that even at first seemed beyond nature to endure, was increased 1,000-fold. When, after a pause, the phantom glided slowly into the chamber, the cloud retreated from it as it had advanced. The bright lamps grew wan, and flickered restlessly as at the breath of its presence. Its form was veiled as the face, but the outline was that of a female. Yet it moved not as move even the ghosts that simulate the living. It seemed rather to crawl as some vast misshapen reptile, and pausing at length, it cowered behind the table which held the mystic volume, and again fixed its eyes through the filmy veil on the rash invoker. All fancies the most grotesque of monk and painter in the early North would have failed to give to the visage of imp or fiend that aspect of deadly malignity which spoke to the shuddering nature of those eyes alone. All else so dark, shrouded, veil, and larva-like. But that burning glare, so intense, so livid, yet so living, had in it something that was almost human in its passion of hate and mockery, something that served to show that the shadowy horror was not at all a spirit, but partook of matter enough at least to make it more deadly and fearful an enemy to material forms. As, clinging with a grasp of agony to the wall, his hair erect, his eyeballs starting, he still gazed back upon that appalling gaze. The image spoke to him. His soul, rather than his ear, comprehended the words. It is said, and here it quotes, "Thou hast entered the immeasurable region. I am the dweller of the threshold. What wouldest thou with me? Silent? Dost thou fear me? Am I not thy beloved? Is it not for me that thou hast rendered up the delights of thy race? Wouldest thou be wise? Mine is the wisdom of the countless ages. Kiss me, my mortal lover." And the horror crawled nearer and nearer to him. It crept to his side, its breath breathed upon his cheek. With a sharp cry he fell to the earth, and insensible, and knew no more. The dweller here of the threshold is also mentioned in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, by the way. This is what befalls those that would enter into that which they are not ready to enter. All initiates must pass through the same experience. All must face the terror and master fear. All will be asked what they would of the terror, and unless they are a master of fear and have passion under control, purified lust until it is a white fire, they will fall before the terrible gaze of the terror or the guilty conscience, If they are prepared and have the key to the immeasurable region, they will demand entrance to the temple, and being master over fear, they will answer, and the terror is their slave and servant. Truly, the terror is their beloved, for without him they would be nothing. What would man be without manhood? The passion is the greatest thing given a man by his God, but it must be placed under control and used only as needed and never to seduce. When abused, it becomes the greatest curse that man can suffer under. For the sake of gratifying the passions, men by far greater majority have truly rendered up the delights of their race. They have given up honor and manhood for a moment of delight to an unnatural appetite. Many pass through life without knowing any better. Such will need many incarnations before they can stand before their God in soul and spirit. Indeed. Man, as we find him today, believe that the sexes were made for pleasure. He does not know better. His ancestors have taught him the same falsehood as he teaches his children the same cursed lie. A few awaken to the fact that there is something grand and noble in these sex principles. They follow for a time until they have tasted of the elixir and their eyes have partly opened. They see the delight of the higher life. But they are not strong enough, and when temptations come, they fall, and the experience of Glyndon is the result. A few enter the path and are strong enough to resist temptations. These are the ones that are masters of the terror, and he becomes their servant instead of their master. Quote, love the white fire is the secret of life, unquote. Passion is death, unquote. Beware of it. Neophyte, know this, that all the highest and the wisest who have in sober truth passed beyond the threshold have had, as the first fearful task, the master and subdue its grisly and appalling guardian. Know that thou canst deliver thyself from those livid eyes. Know that while they haunt, they cannot harm. If thou resistest the thoughts to which they tempt, and the horror they engender, dread them most when thou beholdest them not. Dread them most when thou beholdest them not. It is a fact that when the neophyte tries to do the right of the terror will always appear. But when he falls to temptation, the terror will be nowhere to be near. Do the right and defy the thing, and he will let thee alone, and be at thy command. I know that obsession is nothing more than the terror of the threshold. Sometimes it may be burned out passion and an awakened conscience, and an awful thing this is. A man may seduce all womankind if he does not awaken to his terrible crimes. He will not suffer to the present life, but the minute that he becomes conscious of his wrong and tries to change his thoughts and do right for his wrongs, the terror will stand before him, and well he may say, quote, God help me, unquote, for he needs the greatest power in all the universe to give him strength. Oh, there's a lot of truth in that. You try to change your life and do something good with yourself. It's funny how the negativity comes out of the woodworks to come after you. So-called occult orders that teach their dupes to develop, especially by and through the trance, before they have gone through a system of training and soul purifying, are responsible for an immense amount of obsessions and insanity. No man or woman, no matter who they may be, can bear the sight of the terror unless they have been taken through a course of self-denial, self-mastery, and have placed universal love, the white fire of the philosophers, in place of lust and passion. To do so is to produce insanity. And I think that right there is an extremely good way of explaining so many of the quote-unquote charlatans of the quote-unquote New Age movement. Because it is true that while a lot of these quote-unquote New Agey, whatever you want to call it, it is true that they do teach a lot of, like, actual true doctrines of universal ideas and universal truths. But, the skipping of steps in life in this kind of thing is not something that we can just kind of throw off to the side. You can't, and then I think that's a big mistake for a lot of people who get into spiritualism. They are too afraid to look inside themselves first, like it says here, because it is true. Like, and this is This is coming from somebody who definitely struggled with his own passions for a very long time. And one after the other, after the other, after the other. And I'm not maybe, and I, and I'm still struggling with, quite a few of them, and I probably will be for the rest of my life. But who knows? The amount, the things that I've learned spiritually, and the things that I've been able to accomplish, and you know, to me are amazing. And I will share some of that stuff in some videos in the future with you guys. It'll be more personal videos. I have to be careful how I tell these stories. Uh, but you know what? Like, it is so true. When you start to try to walk the on the path, so to speak, like everything just comes out of nowhere and comes after you. Your own family, like things at work, like random people who want to scream and beat you up because what you cut them off in traffic, like just the most insane things. And then of course your own reactionary side as well. So, it's good to keep that in mind. I'm gonna go ahead and put the brakes on up to see just how long we've been going here. All right. And we are at an hour and 15 minutes. Okay, I'll probably give this maybe another hour, but I'm gonna have to take a quick break and run to the restroom and refill my water and do a couple other things. Make sure my chickens are good. Let's see here. Okay, so I will close that out. And all right, guys. So give me about 6 minutes, and I will be back. good. Okay. Just make sure the sound is good. Yep, sounds good. All right. So, asterisk, the first steps to be taken. The soul's climb to the divine. Well, let's see what this asterisk says. Note, the part, the soul's climb to the divine, is taken from the, quote, Herald of the Golden Age, unquote, edited by one of England's greatest humanitarians, Sidney H. Beard, Esquire, and was written by Reverend J. Todd Ferrier. There you go. I don't think there's anything else. No. Okay. Life is one great climb up the steep ascent to God from our earliest days till we pass over to the other side, and indeed, whether there or here, we are ever climbing. Would that our climbing had the grand results that ought to be ours. Oh, that it led us to the delectable mountains of God, for their truth is pure as the mountain stream. The air to be breathed is rarefied by the conditions of earth. The visions from the summit is of divine splendor. Alas, that there are so few who believe that there are any mountains of God which the soul must climb on its way to the divine. The restless multitudes know less about such things than they even do about the mountains of the earth. The religious world interests itself more in the geography of Mount Ararat, Moriah, and Horeb, Carmel and Tabor, Golgotham and Olivet, than in the sacred, significant, and esoteric meanings of these things. For these are the mountains of God which the soul must climb on its way from the city of destructions, the city of material desire, to the holy city of God with its gate of pearl virtues and its streets of golden love. Ararat is the mountain of rest, the hill that towers above the earth floods, on which the ark of man's soul may find rest for itself amid the turbulent waters of experience. For the flood comes to everyone, and Ararat is ever at hand, an Ararat of the divine presence, though few were there be who realize it. On that mountain we must stay ourselves. There is no security elsewhere when we set out into the new realms of thought and soul conquest, initiation. Men and women do not find Ararat are drowned. Men and women who do not find Ararat are drowned in the sea of their self-confessed troubles, though they seek the highest point of earthly fame and glory and power. Matter cannot save them. Gold cannot rescue them. Pleasure cannot redeem them from the overwhelming flood. But all who seek and find Ararat, the divine presence, and there repose their spirits, come into the consciousness of the divine love and feel its sheltering power. And then there's an asterisk. Note, this is the true and spiritual interpretations of Noah and the flood, and it seems unbelievable how men, ministers so-called, who have passed through a 3 years college course and received the degree of Doctor of Divinity, should show such gross ignorance as they do by taking the Bible story of the flood in a literal sense, and thus teach the people a lot of untruths instead of a great spiritual truth. What an interesting point. But the soul that finds Ararat must also discover Moriah, for the way to the divine is sacrificial. The journey is upwards, not downwards. Consequently, it is very difficult. If we would find true rest in God, we must not withhold from Him even our best, the things we cherish most. God is upon Moriah, but He is there to receive from us our soul's treasure, that we in turn may be able to receive His richest blessings. This mountain is hard to climb. It requires the resolutions of early morning, the fellowship of the rising sun. It is difficult for us to part with that we cherish most, even when the recipient is God, and we find it more trying and difficult still if we have reason to believe that our treasure is essential to all our future welfare and progress. Yet we must climb. We cannot prove ourselves of the quote-unquote faithful unless, like the Father of the faithful, we yield allegiance to God. To turn many to righteousness, we must be ourselves righteous. To teach men how to live the life of faith, we must have been there ourselves. Before we can have a real share in laying the foundations of the city of God and building and peopling it with multitudes of spiritual forces, we must have heard the angelic voice counseling us to obey the divine command and have knelt in obedience before Him. But still our ascent continues. After Moriah comes Sinai, the mountain of the vision of righteous laws. Life is a series of progressive steps or climbs, one hill today, another tomorrow. The soul that desires to rise must go on. There can be no backdrawing for it, even if the next hill be almost inaccessible. It must seek progression by means of every mountain. Thus, after sacrifice through obedience, there comes the knowledge of divine law. And as the true knowledge of spiritual law dawns upon us, what awful majesty we behold. The mountain is wrapped in the mystery of being. The blinding light of illumination and the burden of the voice that speaks to us are as the thunders and lightnings of God. This is our first vision of God, a vision absolutely necessary to all our future progress. Without law, there could be no harmony, and as soul harmony is oneness with God, we must discover and apply to our own life the laws of His being. But how much harder is this than even Moria? It is easier to yield up something once for all than maintain a daily conflict with ourselves, enforcing upon ourselves obedience in thought, word, and deed to the whole law of God. The soul that has not tried does not know. Yep, I guess that's why their motto is try. If it knew, it would flee in terror like Israel. Men repeat the law of Sinai, which has been materialized into meaningless shibboleths, little realizing the profound depths of meaning hidden as a sacred mystery from the vulgar gaze. Yet Sinai is the way to self-knowledge and self-conquest. It is there we discover the pattern after which God would have us fashion our tabernacle. For the law of God is perfect, converting the soul. It raises it up to the plains of the divine. Therefore, let our hearts be filled with great courage, for though the way be difficult, it is necessary. We shall at last conquer, we shall attain. What though the light flashed upon our souls be a consuming fire? Okay. It will give us the knowledge of ourselves. What though the voices and burden of their message overwhelm us? Through self-abasement, we shall at last gain the Christ Spirit. Then the visions of the law on Sinai lead to the great and bitter conflict on Carmel between the prophets of Baal and those of God. Which shall conquer, the world of matter or the realms of spirit, truth or falsehood, the substantial spiritual forces or insubstantial astral illusions? Carmel has been depicted as a sense of false judgment, cruelty, and slaughter equal to the times of the Inquisition, and so it must have been were the historic records of it mere history. Let those delight in such misconceptions who will, trying to read morality into an act that is ordinary history, the world would today condemn. Such an interpretation is one of the mirages by which the astral influences continue to deceive men and blind them to the vision of truth. The vision of Sinai shows us the false prophets within our own temples, the low tides of God, the sensual desires, the material affections, which dominated the kingdom of our spirits and made our worship false and our sacrifices meaningless. So when they're talking about Baal, okay, and they're talking about this, I'm just going to break off for just a quick second. They're talking about this idea of conquering duality, okay? That's what he's really talking about here. Because Baal and the, I think it's Ashtoreth, if I'm not mistaken, or no, I don't remember exactly, but Baal has a opposite, and in that opposite, one is the male dominant, and the other one is the female dominant. I.e., there you go again, duality, and it's about going through both of those to realize that they are both part of the one whole rather than one of themselves, and they both hold their own passions. I.e., that's why you have to go through these things. This whole chapter is about taking steps, and that's part of it. Let's see here. But with the knowledge of these sad facts, there arises the holy purpose to destroy them. We put them to test and find them wanting. They cannot answer our needs. They cannot ratify our best offerings. They cannot give us counsel in the day of trouble. They fail absolutely to show us the face and power of God. But they stand in our way to God. They hinder us. They laugh at our effort. They mock our noblest purposes. They are the powers of the air and of the body that live the sensual life, that revel in the flesh pots. that minister to low passion and mean jealousies. They are the hell forces which array themselves against every earnest and sincere soul, trying to get God enthroned from the soul's holy place and Mammon exalted. To Carmel, with them all, is the voice of God who speaks. The law of God is the way to life through the death of everything false in us. Therefore, to Carmel, with them, every one of them, no redemption can be accomplished in us whilst these false and lying influences are about us. Carmel will be the scene of our great conflict, but it will also be the scene of our triumph. How very interesting. I can't wait to start getting into some of the unknown origins of Christ and how Carmel and the actual mountain itself actually plays a part in a lot of these things. But that'll be one for the future. How hard is it for us to master the evil of which we grow conscious? How slow we are to array before us those weaknesses of ours which have kept us from God. We love to marshal the forces that give us worldly pleasure and to keep them by us, but after Sinai that is impossible. We would be false to our own souls, to the light of heaven, to the voice and law of God, if we refused to summon all these evil powers to Carmel, and there beheld them, so that they should hinder and molest us no more. Ah, my brothers, this hill is hard to climb. Though the glory of its summit is greater than the conflict, yet is the conflict severe, and so many refuse to engage in it, to slay the evil in themselves, and let good be triumphant. Yet it is only the timid and fearful who delays his ascent in conflict, not the brave and the strong. Follow the light where it leads you, even to the spirit of the summit. For the soul that would attain must press forward, having his eye fixed above and his mind on the goal. And let us not forget that the true glory of the soul increases with its conquest over matter. When we have learnt the meeting of Ararat and Moriah, Sinai and Carmel, then we may come to the glory of the Mount of Transfiguration. It is indeed a steep ascent, always rugged, mostly lonely, often dangerous, and at times so difficult as to seem beyond our powers. Yet it is the only way. There could be no transfiguration without Carmel, any more than there could be a Carmel without having seen the vision on Sinai. Mount Tabor may be ours, shall be ours, if we follow the light and do the will of God. We perhaps have been there, and so know something of its ecstasies and glory, for we may all reach it. We may all attain it. We may all climb to its magnificent vision, where we communicate with the world spiritual and eternal. Oh, the joy of it, the intensity of the deep, calm joy when the earth plains are shut out of our vision and the plains of heaven open to our view. Like one of old, fain would we dwell there, bathe in its translucent glory, and return to earth no more. But we have not finished our climbing. The mountain of transfiguration is not the Mount of Olives or Ascension, and between these lies the hill known as Calvary. Calvary, what a wealth of meaning it contains. How many of my readers dream of Calvary for themselves? It is always associated with the death of Jesus, the Calvary held in sacred memory by the churches, but it is meaningless to you and me unless its significance stretches to our individual lives. If we have reached the light and joy of Tabor by means of spiritual prayer and fasting, by dint of severe conflict within our lower selves and our victory over the world, then we must pass on to Calvary, the place of absolute self-sacrifice for the good of man. Listen, my friends, there must be the cross of self-sacrifice and loving service to our race before the crown can be won. There must be death to everything that favors of self in us, ere we enter into the realization of the resurrection life. Who of us will climb this mountain, the highest, the steepest, the loneliest, and the most difficult of all? God grant that there may be a large and glad response of souls for the betterment of the world. One of the most important steps to take when entering the path of initiation is humanness. In Diet and in his work, quote, "The first step of the stairway," unquote, Count Leo Tolstoy says, quoting Tolstoy, "Fasting is an indispensable condition of righteous life. But in fasting itself, as in abstinence, there comes the question, where are we to begin our fasting, and how to fast, how often to eat, what not to eat? As one cannot seriously undertake any work without having become acquainted with the proper order of sequence, so also one cannot fast without knowing how to begin fasting and from what food to fast. Fasting, and in fasting, to consider from what to fast and how to begin, such an idea would seem ridiculous to most men. I remember that an evangelical preacher attacking the asceticism of monasteries and priding himself on his originality said to me, quote, "Our Christianity does not go with fasting and privations, but with beefsteaks," unquote. Oh, sorry. The Christianity and virtue in general with beefsteaks. Oh, God, that's funny. I'm glad this book has at least a little sense of humor to it, right? No, he brings it back again. During the long darkness of the absence of all guidance, pagan or Christian, so many wild, immoral notions have become part of our lives, especially in the lower regions of this first step in righteous life, our relation to food, which nobody gave any consideration, that it is difficult for us even to understand the audacity and madness of affirming that in our time Christianity and virtue can be identified with beefsteaks. We are not sufficiently horrified by this assertion because to us, as has happened that strange thing that we look and see not, and listen and hear not. There is no evil small to which man cannot become accustomed, no hideous sound to hear or monstrosity to see, to which he cannot become so used to or used that he ceases to notice what at once strikes one not too accustomed. Would not. Oh, I'm sorry. No monstrosity to see, to which he cannot become so used that he ceases to notice what at once strikes one not so accustomed. It is the same in the moral region. Christianity with virtue and beefsteaks. This is really the first step on the stairway, as Tolstoy pleases to call it, because the man who eats meat will find it next to impossible to become a master of his passions. Meat is a passion producer and it also carries a foreign and crime-producing element into the blood. Without pure blood, it is absolutely impossible to gain the highest results during development. Meat eating is also an unnatural habit, and no man has a right to eat his fellow being, even though he may think that the being he eats is not as intelligent as he is. For a righteous life, a certain order of good conduct is indispensable. If a man's aspirations towards a righteous life are serious, he will inevitably follow one defined consequence, and that, in this order, the first virtue he will cultivate will be abstinence or self-control. And in the cultivation of abstinence, he will inevitably proceed in one definite order, and of this order, the beginning is abstinence in food, i.e., fasting. And in fasting, if he earnestly and sincerely seeks a righteous life, his first act of abstinence will be abstinence from animal food, because, not to mention the excitement of passions produced by such food, its use is plainly immoral, as it requires an act contrary to moral feeling, i.e., killing, and is called forth only by greed, daintiness. All the moral progress of humanity, which lies at the foundation of every advance, always takes place slowly, but the sign of essential and not merely accidental progress is in its continuity and its increasing speed. During the last 10 years, this movement has made rapid progress. A growing number of books and periodicals on this subject appear annually. More and more people are to be met who have given up animal food, and every year in foreign countries, especially in Germany, Britain, and America, there is an increase in number of vegetarian hotels and restaurants. This movement must be especially welcome to those who live in aspiration towards the setting up of the kingdom of God on earth, not because vegetarianism itself is an important step towards this kingdom, but because it is a sign that man's aspiration towards moral perfection is serious and sincere. Excuse me. Since it has taken the one unalterable order of progress peculiar to this attainment, which can begin only by the first step. Ugh. Pardon me, I need to take another drink. Tertullian, the most learned of all the Latin theologians, was bold enough to proclaim his convictions. The second century in which he lived needed it. It is not to be wondered at the orthodox party of his time parted from his company. His trenchant words have come down to us and are required by this age also. The habits of the Western Christian Church have been a blot on the teaching of the masters and the fathers. Westernized Christianity, in seeking to conquer the East, has too often only materialized the faith. The failure of the missionaries to win over the cultured of the East is through our gross Western habits of living. For the man whose religion teaches him to hold all life as sacred is not likely to be converted to a faith that deems no life sacred but man's. These things, Tertullian taught, that flesh-eating was not conducive to the highest life, that it violated the unwritten and written moral law, that it debased man in intellect and heart, and that it closed the doors of the, quote, inner temple of an intuition. What Tertullian was for the West, Clement of Alexandria became to the East. The founder of the famous school of thought at Alexandria, he himself was the most cultured philosopher of this time. In his instructor, quote unquote, he says of one subject of eating that, quoting Clement of Alexandria, those who use the most frugal fare are the strongest, the healthiest, and the noblest. We must guard against those sorts of food which persuade us to eat when we are not hungry, bewitching the appetite. For is there not within a temperate simplicity a wholesome variety of eatables, vegetables, roots, olives, herbs, milk, cheese, fruits of all kinds of dry food? For of sorts of food, these are the most proper which are fit for immediate use without fire, since they are readiest, and second to these are those which are the simplest, though they have to be cooked. Excuse me. But those who bend around inflammatory tables, nourishing their own diseases, are ruled by a more licentious disease, which I shall venture to call the demon of the belly, the worst and most vile of demons. It is far better to be happy than to have a devil dwelling in us, and happiness is found only in the practice of virtue. There is an asterisk, which I will go down and read. This is from J. Todd Ferrier's quote, in the Herald of the Golden Age, unquote. The purer and nobler life the neophyte lives, the purer his vision will become, and easier it will be for him to reach the goal that he desires to reach. Man's first initiation is in trance, in big letters. In dreams commence all human knowledge. In dreams hovers over measureless space the first faint bridge between spirit, and this world and the worlds beyond. But this higher trance cannot be brought on by mere will alone, nor yet in a day. I would agree with that. Those that would teach you development without training and purification, without giving up high living, without fasting, meditation, imagination, dreams, bewilderment, will but open your mind while the soul